and thank you to CoinShares, to Meltem, Devin Walsh, and some other folks who helped coordinate this event, but unfortunately could not be here today. For those of you who I haven't already met, my name is Devin Walsh. I'm the senior analyst on the CoinFund team. And I want to thank you all for joining us today for a very special edition Rabbithole talk. As many of you know, CoinFund hosts these regular meetups where we like to shine a spotlight on an entrepreneur or innovator or investor in the space and world of decentralized networks once or twice a month. Today we're thrilled to host a fireside chat between Jake Ruckman, our founder and managing partner at CoinFund, and David Pakman, a partner at Venrock, which is one of the oldest venture capital firms in the world. David and the team at Venrock have been platform partners with us at CoinFund for the past year and a half or so, and David's investment experience and insight have been proven invaluable for us at CoinFund. I don't want to take up too much time with my introduction, but just a quick bio for David. After graduating at Penn School of Engineering, David went to work at Apple and helped co-create Apple's music group. He worked at N2K, which is one of the first online music companies, and co-founded MyPlay, which was a pioneer of the digital music locker. Later on, he became CEO of eMusic, which would become, at its time, the largest digital retailer of independent music in the world. Given his experience in the music space, it should come as no surprise that he's also an avid musician and songwriter. At Venrock, he led investments in companies like Dollar Shave Club, Crunchyroll, and Clout, and he also oversaw their investment in Nest. In the blockchain space, he led Venrock's investment into YouNow, which many of you may have seen just received their Reg A+ approval from the SEC for the distribution of their token. And I'm sure they'll speak a bit more about these investments, but he's also led Venrock's investments into Dapper Labs of CryptoKitties fame and 3Box, which is a framework for your user data storage. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jake and David.
Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for coming. My name is Jake Ruckman. I'm the CEO and founder of CoinFund. It's my pleasure to be interviewing David Pakman today.
Full-on imposter syndrome. Everyone in this room knows more about this topic than I do.
Devin, thank you for the introduction, and maybe we've gotten the facts of your background, David. Maybe can you talk a little bit, in an introductory way about why do you work in tech? What drives you to be an investor and an entrepreneur in the tech world?
Well, I'm a complete nerd, computer science engineer. I've been playing with computers since I was, 8 or 9 years old. So there was no other career for me other than tech in some way. It's just in my blood. I think I ended up as an investor because my first job out of college was at Apple. I was really fortunate. And the people at that company were just extraordinary. And so I found myself with this network of incredibly ambitious, high-functioning technologists. And the path that most of them took was work at a big company like Apple, learn a lot about products and tech, and meet great people, then go do a few startups. And then if any of those are successful, become a VC. And then that was this path that was seared in my mind, and many of my mentors followed that path. So I was like, well, that seems like a pretty good path. And the theory was you were able to take your knowledge of being an entrepreneur and help other entrepreneurs, be successful without having to have 1,500 people report to you and manage a company every day. So I followed that path, and I've been super fortunate, and I love the opportunity.
That's wonderful. So maybe then let's jump into kind of the tail end of your career. I think it's for the last, is it 9 years or
11 now, November.
Okay, so we need to update that bio on the Venrock website. So about 11 years you've now spent at Venrock, as Devin had said. You led some of the pretty famous investments there. Can you just talk a little bit about how does Venrock invest? How do you what kind of companies do you look for? How do you make investment decisions there?
Yeah, well, I think the first perspective is that people say that venture capital is the triumph of hope over data, because the odds are you're going to lose, right? It's like a 20% chance that a company is going to be successful, and a much smaller percentage chance that it's going to be $1 billion outcome, which is the only thing we're playing for, right? The structure of venture capital is such that the mega winners are the ones that return everything. And so the chance of finding them is really, really slim. So it's this crazy job. Like, why would you take a job with such terrible odds? It's a really good question. The answer is because it's really fun. You get to work with incredible people who have enormous ambition and want to sort of bend the world to their will a little bit. And those are incredible people to be around, right? So that's why we do it. But it's really hard, I think. And you need a lot of things to go right. You know, you kind of need to be lucky, and you need to make enough bets that some of them can work out. My approach is to find people smarter than I am, surround myself with them, and like try to draft off of what they know, and try to help use them to see the future a little bit. Which is why I partnered with CoinFund, because I, recognized, it's sort of hard not to recognize the amount of energy and possibilities around decentralized networks and everything built around crypto. But we just didn't have enough specific knowledge about what's going on, because we hadn't followed it nearly as long as probably most of you in this room. So, you are a living example of what we try to do, which is find people smarter than we are, work with them, learn, and try to partner and find great companies.
So that's a nice kind of lead into the next question, which is, how did blockchain start coming up? What was the signal that you folks at Venrock saw in the market that said, hey, this is like real, and this could get big, and we should be paying attention to this?
Well, we live in the streams all day long, so we all knew about Bitcoin, super early on, and one thing I really look for is when the masses are dismissing something, because in almost all cases, the masses are wrong about a judgment of the future, particularly the press. Right, so media, their job is not actually to try to be right in the long term, because there's really no consequences for writing something that is wrong in the future, because it's only consumed in the moment. So a good predictor for me of things that are interesting are when things are dismissed by the mass market when they're early. So Bitcoin was one of those things, right? It's just for criminals, and it's Russian dark money, and this is meaningless. So that was an indicator, like, all right, well, this probably has something interesting.
Did you see an analogy there? Because maybe to like the early internet days, because I sometimes hear stories about, like, in the early days, people are like, why would I ever put a credit card online?
Yeah.
That's crazy. This is for criminals. Is there that same kind of signal?
Certainly. I think so. I was present at like the commercialization, the beginning of the commercialized internet. Like 1995, I was working at Apple. I downloaded, NCSA, Telnet, and was logging on other computers using links, right? And like, wait a second, in a microsecond, I can connect to another computer and transfer text documents. Like, that's the end of newspapers. Like, it was abundantly clear, and I don't mean to say that I was smart, but it just wasn't that hard a leap to see that the flow of digital information was an advantage over, the flow of atoms. So I felt like that was knowing that the internet was going to blow up everything was a very easy observation to see at the time if you were present. And yes, it was dismissed as slow, right? This doesn't work, which is certainly what we're all have been facing for many years now about Ethereum and like, are these networks ever going to be able to scale? It was not mainstream, used only by geeks, which of course is not what happens in the internet, and we've been facing that also. It's crypto's only for crypto people. So I think those analogies held. But the one that really stands out to me was social media, which was massively dismissed, right? People are posting pictures of their lunch, right? And it's laughed at. And now there's 2.5 billion people on Facebook every day, right? So those are signal. That's signal value. When things are dismissed as toys and won't become mainstream, that there's signal value. And so with Bitcoin, that was an easy one. We read the Ethereum white paper in, I guess it was 2014, and then that blew our minds. And it was like, wait a second. We had gone through just prior to that, we had gone through the blockchain, not Bitcoin moment that everyone else went through. But it was Ethereum that, wait a second, you can do compute this way, which we had not seen until we read that. And that was like, okay, wait a second, that's a fundamental architectural shift to the way cloud computing is being promulgated today. And that was really, we understand the notion of network endpoints being part of power, because that's what social networks are, and that's what Napster was, right? So that was a real eye-opening moment, and that's when we started. We tried to start to get serious. I think we missed tons. We missed tons of stuff, but then we said we need to start. We did start getting serious.
Okay, so I asked you, why do you think blockchain is interesting, and how did you get the signal? And you said, okay, so we see people dismissing this, and we started digging in. That's one half of the story.
Yeah.
The other half of the story is this stuff can get really big. Why do you think that?
Well, I wouldn't say it that way. I would say two signals that have led us to feel really excited about this. One is just the sheer number of developers building around decentralized platforms. That we're followers. But, venture investors are followers. We invest in entrepreneurs, and so if that's what entrepreneurs are doing, that at your own peril you would ignore it. Right? So the developer activity was a huge signal, but also the fact that it is so when you have an architectural change that is so different from the way other things are being built, you really want to look at that as a tip of the spear opportunity for disruption, right? And for classic disruption, like does it pick off the low end of the market? Does it offer a benefit that the legacy technology fundamentally will never be able to afford? And that to me is what's so exciting, and we've all spent several years now writing about what are the true benefits of decentralized networks that cannot be made available to us by centralized ones, and we've all landed on censorship resistance and all the other arguments that we're making, no central bank and all the things that we're talking about that have not yet proven to be mainstream desirable, but are so powerful as a disruptive force that it makes us look at it and say, all right, so what are the things that will take this mainstream?
Great. So, as investors in blockchain, and we have felt this quite viscerally being in the space for like 4+ years and looking at the development of the space, what we see is that, first of all, this is very complex technology, so it has a lot of depth around, how do you make a decentralized network, how do you scale it, all the different technologies that you can use to do that, all the different technologies that are built in the next layer to provide infrastructure services. And then at the same time, you have this like very general technology that is kind of like a database, and you can apply that in a very wide set of contexts. So you could be doing ride sharing, you could be doing computational networks, you could be doing social media, and as an investor, that's a huge challenge. So what I've found is, if you're just kind of generally a VC, you might not have that technical depth to go to the consensus layer of a blockchain and understand how it works. And also as a VC, you tend to specialize. Like I'm a VC in biotech, I'm a VC in AI, and here you have to actually subsume all of those verticals at the same time. How do you guys think about that at Venrock, and how do you approach that problem?
Yeah, I think there are definitely different approaches to being a successful venture investor, and some people have built their entire careers in a single vertical because the vertical they're picking is able to produce winners for more than a decade, right? Those are SaaS, right? Enterprise SaaS. But there are other verticals that have a shorter lifespan and that you can't make your entire career in unless you want a short career. Social, actually, maybe if you invested in Facebook, you don't need to worry about the future of your career. David Z does seem to have retired, but if you want to still do venture, you wouldn't say like it's all about social now. That's all I'm doing. So my view is that you should look for, we call them waves, which are large technologically based platform types of transformations that will affect a market for a long number of years, and try to be early on that wave and go deep on it. But that, if you were right and you ride it for a while, be prepared to move on to the next one at some point. So each of us at Venrock, each partner probably has maybe two-ish, let's call it offensive theses about which markets or technologies we want to invest in, and we go super deep, try to meet everyone we can. Mine are crypto, robotics and automation, and I still do consumer, I would say more broadly. The other point that your question made me think about is when you're confronted with something as big and complex, let's say as blockchain and crypto, how do you prosecute investing in it? Most of our much more successful competitors in this space have gone all in and said it's so big that we're only going to focus on crypto, and that by not actually doing that, you're at a structural disadvantage, right? And that might prove to be true, actually. I'm still not convinced that my strategy of being more selective rather than playing at every level is going to be able to produce great returns. We'll see. But the way we think about it is there are lots of layers, right, to a stack every time there's a new architecture that comes to market. So maybe one way to slice the crypto world might be, dApps, let's call it developer tools, and develop a non-compute infrastructure in the middle, and then layer 2, layer 1 protocols at the base. And then you might slice that also by market, DeFi, right, which would have this, or gaming or something like that. So you could look at that, and then what you would try to do is make an educated guess about, well, so where's the most amount of value going to accrue in that stack? Because in almost every market, value does not accrue evenly to the layers. And we could give hundreds of examples where you want to be a supplier, or you want to be the aggregator, or you want to be the middleware. Right? So we're trying to make educated judgments about where that will be, so that instead of saying we're going to play crypto at every single level and every single vertical, let's try to pick the cross-section of the ones where we think high value will be, and let's make a couple bets in those places. I don't know them right, but that's the
Great. Thank you, David. And let's get into a little bit of the detail here. So one of the ways that we first got to know you really well as a board member at YouNow, one of our kind of like largest digital asset investments at CoinFund. Great team. Arguably, this is a company that has one of the most successful strategies where they're a sort of traditional consumer technology company, but with a digital asset strategy and sort of decentralization plan going forward. So you were on the board, you saw the whole thing go down. Can you talk a little bit about why that was the right decision to go down this path for you now, and how you've sort of supported that decision, and has it worked out?
This is generated entirely by the company, not by the board, which is typically how companies move forward. This was this is a pioneer in mobile video social networks. Really, the very first. They were doing it before mobile. They were a web-based video social network, and really focusing on live. And live video is a super hard way to build a platform because it's synchronous only, which means you can only use it when there's someone else who wants to use it at the same time as you. But all of the largest and most successful social platforms are asynchronous, which is you can write whenever you want, and that anyone can read when they want. And so they chose a problem that had not yet been solved, which was doing live video, but that happens to be a limited market, right? And it makes it harder to build a sustainable platform. Still, they invented it, and they were right. Their argument was there will be live video, and then Instagram copied them, and Facebook copied them, and Twitter copied them, Periscope, and YouTube copied them, and sort of the oxygen kind of got snuffed out of that as a standalone social product. But what they learned along the way was the way to really incent more synchronous behavior is to use reward-based systems, right? And now you see that with Twitch, right? Tipping and virtual items. And so they were early. They were early to marrying rewards and virtual items with social behavior. And it was, I think, through that where they said, well, an interesting opportunity is presenting itself. There are some decentralized reward systems that are possible based on tokens. And it also might unlock additional funding options for us, because not a lot of people are excited about investing in social products. But if we could monetize the platform and actually increase usage by having a decentralized reward system, or really a liquid reward system that can be taken outside of the social network itself, that might really incent behavior. And so they came to me and the board, and they said, we want to do this. They had gotten super smart. They went to you and others, and you guys helped educate them, designed an entire token economy for them. And we were supportive because it seemed like a fantastic idea. The risks were, there was no signs of regulatory clarity when they embarked on this, and none of us knew what was going to shape up there. And so I think, unfortunately, they were forced to be distracted for 18 months as they tried to navigate the US token offering and token usage landscape. And they're really one of only two at this point projects who has successfully demonstrated that they navigated. They've got a Reg A approved, SEC approved token. So it was out of ingenuity by the team, and what they're now able, finally, after 18 months or 2 years of working on this, to have a live token in a social product to see if that versus restricted virtual currency that can only be used in the product itself could help achieve better usage metrics, and we're all watching every day now.
Yeah, that's great. And I believe Yonatan from Props Project is in the room.
I saw him walk in.
If anyone has questions on that, Yonatan, wave your hand. You guys can ask him about the project. Let's move on to a couple of other projects. So to date, CoinFund and Venrock have co-invested into 2 projects. Last year, you guys led a pretty sizable round in Dapper Labs, which are the creators of CryptoKitties. And then a few months ago, together with the guys down the hall here at Placeholder, we invested in a company called 3Bots.
All because of Devin.
All because of Devin, for sure. Let's speak about each of those projects and sort of the thesis that you're thinking about when you look at Dapper and when you look at 3Bots.
So one of the things that probably makes me a less interesting investor for the crypto space than, let's say, the guys down the hall is that I'm looking for evidence of demand rather than purely hypothetical building blocks that will be necessary. And most of you that have been in crypto longer than I have been either building blocks in anticipation of what will be needed or investing in those building blocks sort of pre-traction, right? Pre-evidence of demand. And to that, I applaud you. You have higher risk tolerance than I do. But what I keep looking for is, show me some evidence that there is either consumer or developer demand for this product or technology or layer. And there are plenty actually in the crypto space where that's true. Some of it we went through in 2017 and then the demand's come back down again, but that's okay, that's signal, that's super strong signal. So maybe just because I'm a less informed investor, I'm looking for stuff that shows demand. So what did the CryptoKitties guys prove? Well, they invented crypto collectibles with the protocol that they put together, and then they ate their own dog food and released CryptoKitties on top of the NFC protocol. And that combination was met by lots and lots of demand. So like $24 million worth of CryptoKitties in a month and a half, and it had a really interesting business model to it, and they had sort of lightweight gaming around it, and that, to so many of us, was like, okay, that's a really interesting indicator of some sector that's some people that are interested. And then I went and met the team and have been amazingly impressed. And now they're going to double down, right, in a big way. They've announced both the 2 things that or 3 things that they're doing. One, they're building a layer 1 smart contracts platform because they can't find one out there that can support the high velocity of compute, not just transactions, that lightweight gaming needs on blockchains. They have announced and are building their own wallet to make onboarding for non-crypto people into NFCs easier. That's the Dapper wallet. And they're partnering with IP holders to build dApps that are essentially crypto collectible-based lightweight games. That's super ambitious because they're trying to do 3 layers of the stack, but it's really hard to argue with them that, well, you can't do it unless you have the infrastructure below, and Ethereum doesn't meet our needs, and EOS doesn't meet our needs, and et cetera. And you can't onboard consumers unless it's super easy to put your credit card in and buy a CryptoKitty, which it's not today. And if we just invent our own IP and not partner with major IP holders, then it's kind of a game model. It's a total hit-driven model. I have no idea if the next CryptoKitty Cheese Wizards is going to be a hit. So they said, let's mitigate some risk there by working with the NBA, who's kind of big. So maybe that. So I love the strategy. It's super ambitious, but they have to prove it. But that's the investment thesis, that one of the early mass market use cases for consumer activity on blockchain will be crypto collectibles and lightweight gaming. And I can tell you why I think that's right, but it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what happens next year.
Yeah, and just maybe to add to that a little bit, like one of the nice things about CryptoKitties is that there's a nice analogy to other kinds of more traditional digital assets. So we see like Fortnite assets now, generating like billions in revenue. And for anyone who might not understand the blockchain, or for anyone who might not understand the concept of like blockchain-based collectible, the really nice analogy is like, look, but the fact of the matter is, in our world, digital assets are being sold increasingly and already at volumes that are quite investable, right? So I'm excited about that project as well, kind of for that reason. It seems to fit into a larger tech trend.
Yeah, I do like to, like you, like to look for some historical consumer analogy, because it's very hard to invent, for consumers, it's hard to invent new habitual use cases that they're required to adopt in order for you to be successful, right? So if people are already listening to music every day, then getting them to stream music might not be as impossible, particularly if it's pretty easy to do. If people are already watching television all the time, then getting them to stream TV shows, if you're Netflix, might not be so impossible to do. If you're asking them to do something they've absolutely never done before, it's a heavier lift. So asking people to collect things, which is something that billions of people do every day, is not a heavy lift. As long as you make it super easy, and I think this is where crypto in general sometimes falls down. So there was a Pew research survey that came out about 4 months ago that asked Netflix users, why do you like Netflix? So number one was there are no commercials. Number two is I can watch whatever I want to watch when I want to watch it. So there's no appointment viewing required. And number three is I can binge watch it. Number four was I like the shows. So what are the first three things other than not specific to Netflix content? They fix all the things that are wrong with legacy television, with linear television, right? Commercial interruptions, appointment only, and you can't binge, you gotta wait. So that is such a remarkably important insight to remember as a consumer product person, because the new thing has to fix the objections to the old way of doing it. So the question I ask the Dapper Labs people and everyone I meet in crypto, not at layer one, but at the DApp layer, is what is it about this solution that fixes what's wrong with whatever it was previously? What does DeFi fix that banks do today? And there are arguments for this, and you're probably all jumping out of your seat saying, I know exactly what they do, which is great, but I think that's the question that has to be fundamentally answered. And so, like, collecting crypto collectibles, what does it fix that baseball cards, or cloaks within Fortnite is broken? Great.
Let's move on to $3. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Devin said we should invest, we said yes.
That's just how things work.
Exactly. Yeah. This is, again, it's the same thing. It's demand. So other investors have had a thesis for a long time that self-sovereign identity is a fundamentally transformative notion of identity. Identity is a core element of everything humans do electronically. Like, it's a universally required, it affects absolutely everything in the world. So smarter people than I am have had a core thesis around this. I'm interested in identity as a core piece of the stack that has to be built, but what I got really excited about when the $3 guys was 150 developers a day were installing the $3 node package. And it was like consistent, since their launch. I had met them when it was Uport. I had met Michael when it was Uport, and was like, yeah, identity, right? Like, someone's going to do that on the blockchain. That's going to be really big. I don't know who's going to win and why. Uport guys are smart guys, but it's part of this consensus thing. So there's no investment opportunity at the time. But then Devin tracks this, and they spin out, and they kind of re-architect the product to be really, I think, attacking the early developer problems, which is not just my user needs to have identity, but I'm a decentralized application, and there's no way for me to store user data decentralized. Like, it's total mess for me to do that. I can't really write to IPFS without some schema on top of it. Orbit's interesting, but I haven't like wrestled that to the ground yet. So $3 comes out and says, oh, you're a dApp and you need to store user data decentralized? Well, of course you have to because it's best practice. I mean, if you're a decentralized app, but you're storing everything in S3 or even a NoSQL database running on AWS, that's not decentralized. You are the weak link. You are not censorship resistant. You fundamentally don't pass the test. Actually, are you a decentralized app? So $3 says no problem. Here's the answer. And we had this problem at Dapper. Like they literally for CryptoKitties stored your user information, like which kitty you own. Well, sorry, no, that was on the blockchain. But like certain attributes of the kitty or your game behavior, like how many points you have. That was all stored centrally. Okay, so that doesn't work. So they were solving a present problem. Still, they're solving now a present problem, and they're being rewarded by, well, now they're more than 400 installations a day. So that's one.
Great.
Also, you guys had said you should do that.
Awesome. Thank you, David. I guess let me do one more question, and then we'll go to a little fun thing which we prepared, which is a lightning round, and then we'll go to audience questions after that. But my last question is, basically around progress. So like recently, some more traditional-minded investors, like Fred Wilson at USB, Albert Wenger, they sort of come out and they have said, Fred said, Ethereum confounds me. Basically, he's saying that there's a bit of disorganization in the developer community of Ethereum, and so it feels like maybe some of the lead that Ethereum had is being squandered. At the same time, the developer community shot back and said, hey guys, you know what, like we're not a company and we don't really follow those rules, and that's how it should be. So where do you stand on that? Do you think Ethereum has squandered some lead? Or do you think this is just like a brand new development style?
Well, if you're in a world where no one is a company, then I think you can afford the slower pace that emerges from being a truly decentralized movement, right? It's harder to organize, it's harder to direct, and I think it's harder to hit key milestones. That would be fine if you're not competing with anyone else who's trying to move quickly. But I think the challenge, I think the reason so many of us have been frustrated by Ethereum is if you view it as a platform, then you look at what can be built on top of it. And if you're investing in things on top of it, which many of us are, and you're frustrated by the pace, then you gotta try to solve that problem. And there is no, it's an organization, it's a feature, not a bug, right? Is I think what Ethereum is saying. So yes, I'm just as frustrated as many others by the fact that it's taking way longer to, and look, that platform has the earliest lead and has huge demands of people by developers to improve, not just transaction throughput, but so many other key pieces. And doesn't have the best track record of saying, well, look, if you're a developer tool or developer platform in the traditional sense, in a centralized way, there's like a whole playbook about how you please developers, right? You're all live in the Slack channel all the time, you are posting bugs, you're knocking them down, you're saying, you post your release schedule, next week we're gonna fix these 3 things and add these 4 features, then you do that, and developers gain confidence in you, and they say, I'm going to commit to this platform because every time we post a bug, they fix it, or they're responsive to the community. That's a sign of a healthy developer platform. In Decentraland, I'm sorry, I can't use that word. In the decentralized world, what are you gonna do? Like you have to, you got to read the tea leaves of the community, and I think that frustrates commercially minded developers. So I understand where the frustration comes. I'm frustrated too, but I'm also respectful of the fact that the people who have been building in the decentralized world longer than I've been thinking about it, which is probably all of you, are approaching this from reasons other than just I want to build a new app or software product that makes a venture capitalist successful. They're doing it for other reasons. And some of those reasons require or want to be built with different architectures. I don't mean technical architectures, but like decentralized, collaborative models. And it would have been just as easy to be frustrated by open source when it first came out, and saying, why don't these guys just turn into a company? This guy's asleep when I need the bug fixed, right? Who's going to call him and tell him to fix it? So I want to be respectful to this and be open-minded that actually maybe these other models are a feature, not a bug, and we should do well to not be too frustrated.
And that's a great point, and in many ways, blockchain projects are sort of the natural extension from open source. And they are open source, like their code bases much more often than not are open source. But now that openness is extending to the actual organization of the company. And actually one of the most exciting areas that I think like long term we'll see a lot of growth in blockchain is the concept of open source sustainability, where you can create these code bases, but you can also create sustainable business models for the development of these like open, perhaps free projects. So that's a great analogy.
And let me ask you, because you're a developer too, Jake. There's more to this entire movement than just like it's an interesting new technical architecture, right? I mean, you've spent so much time on governance models. Why do you have to spend time on governance models? Because we're talking about organizing these projects very differently,
yeah.
and it seems to me it's one of the things that attracts you to this, right? That you and many others want these projects to be governed differently than a traditional company, right? Wouldn't you say that's the future?
I would, absolutely, and I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think if you sort of abstract, right, and you zoom out of blockchain, what you get is just phenomenal ideas around just coordination technology of humans. And if you think about like what a company is, what an open source project is, what a code base is, what a construction crew building a tall building is, right? These are all sort of human organizations. And the idea of open, peer-to-peer, decentralized networks has forced us to think about that, as a resource that everybody shares. And when that happens, you absolutely have to think about things like governance, about who owns what, about how do we make decisions in this group. And I think like ultimately for me, if you zoom out to like the core CoinFund thesis, is that we're building decentralized networks that are what we call in economics common goods. These are goods that are available to everyone in an open way, and certainly goods that have to be governed. Traditionally, that has been taken on by governments, but now we have an opportunity to have that, to have an alternative governance model.
Yes, so I think that's a critical observation that may actually point more to the friction of venture funding models, like movements or projects like this, than about like, hey, Ethereum's not moving quickly enough, right? Maybe the issue is, well, maybe these projects shouldn't be funded by venture capitalists.
Interesting. Yeah, that's contrarian.
I guess I should just go home.
So let's move on to our last bit here, which is a little bit fun. We'll call this a lightning round. I'm going to call out a topic in blockchain, get a little bit deeper into the issues here. And maybe you could give us a reaction, 1, 2, 3 sentences at most.
Can I defer to you when I don't understand?
Absolutely.
Like I generally do.
So number one, though, I picked these so you have some experience.
In other words, he dumbed it down.
So number one, layer 2 and lightning networks.
Yeah, so clearly a requirement, particularly for Bitcoin and Ethereum, but I have questions about the economic model behind them. How do they make money?
Mm-hmm. Great. Tokenization of assets.
So I was skeptical that this would happen early in crypto land, but recently folks on the traditional side say, no, it's actually going to happen before total digital tokenization or tokenization of digital assets, because there's trillions of dollars that invest in real world assets, and so if you can just lower the bar for that or make it easier or take some friction out, you will attract way more, like institutional money will come to buy tokenized physical assets. So I'm open-minded, and I thought it was going to be hard to do on a regulatory side, but these are, Reg D-able. So could happen very soon.
Mm-hmm. Digital collectibles.
All in, read my blog post.
Great. Infrastructure services, for example, staking companies or companies that provide one-click node infrastructure.
Yeah, it's like, why wouldn't you, right? I mean, it's just, otherwise your digital assets are being, it's like storing cash in the mattress, it should earn interest. So much bigger opportunity than people are talking about.
Great. DeFi, aka decentralized finance, aka open finance.
I like the movement behind it for sure. I mean, who likes the banks? But there should be $1 trillion getting 15% interest right now, and it's not. So we have other problems to fix.
Facebook's Libra.
Not decentralized, but at the same time could get 1.5 billion people on crypto like in a week. So kind of hope it happens, but they've got such regulatory problems. I don't know that it will.
That's a lot of comfort. You really think 1 billion people in a week?
Yeah, well, they already said they would give a Libra wallet to every WhatsApp user.
Yeah.
That's 1 billion people right there.
But do you think like all of them convert?
No, but there could be 1 billion wallets on the chain, right, in a
Right.
week, and some large percentage of them will come and redeem their $5 to $10, and then send it to a friend. Like, I mean, yeah, they could get a lot of people, to be on the crypto.
Great. Next topic: traditional investors entering the space.
Man, they know what they're talking about. That's me. Well, I think we want all their money, right? I mean, we want their money in.
It's taken a while. Do you think it will come soon?
Yeah, well, some people that think about this and that are smarter than I do think the pieces are coming together, but we're not there yet, right? I think it's a combination of trust, regulatory clarity required, and I don't know that we're selling them the right products yet.
Great. Regulation.
Exiting. Venture capital, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, traditional investors, the space you're talking about, talk about how they're going to exit once they've gotten in.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Well, I think we were talking maybe about liquid assets though, right?
Yeah. So,
What about regulation of digital assets? Complex field.
Yeah. In some ways, I'm not surprised where we are. I was hopeful that we would get more clarity more quickly, like all of you, but I don't think we will. I think it'll be a continued morass. I think that's really, if you're an LP, handing your money to a manager, investing in this space, that really should be your number one question is, no matter how good your thesis and how good you are at picking companies, does the regulatory uncertainty or maybe even regulatory randomness deprive you of the outcomes you think you can have?
This is my favorite question to ask blockchain-focused investors. In the future, will there be a few base layers or many base layers?
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
So what I'm going to say is a guess because I don't know the answer. I think that I can only follow the historical map of technology platforms, and that's that platforms tend to be winner take most. So I think it's more likely that we see market share split of like 60, 20, 20, and then a bunch of small ones, than we see 1,000 that are evenly split. And so I would say I'm more on the few than the many.
Great. Results have been mixed, but how do you feel about the crypto fund space?
Brave, just early. I mean, probably right, but early, right? Like most of the smartest people, you guys and the folks down the hall and the others who have been doing this longer than I have, are probably fundamentally right about the way the world will go, and just wrong about timing. It's going to take longer.
Yeah. Great, David. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
fielding my questions. Let's go to audience questions.
So, David and Jake, thank you again for hosting this for all of us. My question is, if we scale out, this is probably an oversimplification, but we see in early stage entrepreneurs sort of have three phases. There's go-to-market, there's product market fit, and then there's growth. So it seems to me that most blockchain-focused entrepreneurs are still most heavily in like this building and go-to-market stage, which is why we may not necessarily have crypto on the mainstream yet. So my question to you is, given your depth and breadth of early stage tech VC, what patterns, if any, from the past in early stage tech do you think will carry over into crypto in order to get these arguably complex crypto network to the mainstream?
Yeah, I think if you ask a crypto developer how's it going? They tell you the missing pieces of infrastructure or infrastructure maturity that they lack in order to get their vision live, right? So that just tells me we're still early in the delivery of key pieces of infrastructure. And it's not just pieces, but it's the pieces have to work, right? Have to be somewhat proven, have to have some sufficient adoption that you know the project's going to survive, so you feel comfortable betting on it. So we're still not there, and it's one of these like it's always next year kind of thing, but it feels like it's next year. So it's hard to know that if you don't have infrastructure in place to build seamless, great experiences, then you can't judge whether consumers truly want them or not, because you have to put your best foot forward. But I will say that I remember back in like '95, like you could buy CDs online by using a text-based, like sort of dial-up equivalent, right? Like press 1 for classical, 2 for jazz, 3 for rock, search Rolling Stones, buy a CD. And there was demand, like people were doing it. They were willing to go through great hoops for the convenience of getting a CD through the mail. So we look for that in crypto, and we know when we see the number of accounts at Coinbase, right? Or we see the number of people who bought a CryptoKitty, or what the value of certain coins are, or volume on certain networks. We know there's evidence of demand, but we're all confronted with, is it because the experience isn't good or the infrastructure isn't right? So I don't have the answers, but my gut is that we have immature infrastructure necessary to produce the experiences that will onboard a lot more users, and I think we're all trying to solve it.
Thanks, David. Let's go to the next question, and then I'll repeat the question for the recording here. Yes?
I have a question that ties back to your comments on CryptoKitties, as well as whether or not we'll see a few base layers or one. Do you think we'll see more companies go full stack, where they're building all that infrastructure that they need? And if so, in the future, if some of those companies are more successful than the others, how do you think it affects the 60-20-20 distribution that you mentioned?
So the question is, do we think we'll see companies be building more of the tech stack, including maybe even the base layer underneath, and will those companies be more successful?
I think that what I've heard from all the layer 1 projects that I've been lucky enough to meet with is, boy, that's a much harder lift than they thought it was. It turns out it's really hard, right, to build a robust, scalable, provenly trustworthy, decentralized layer 1 protocol. And so for that reason, I think you're less likely to be able to raise enough capital to pursue a full stack approach, because it takes so much work just to do base layer. Also, there's a lot of good base layer projects that have just not shipped, right, because of how hard it is. So my guess is, no, for a while, we won't see most go full stack. But my guess is long term, what tends to happen is the ones that are successful go either up or down, right? In the way that Amazon was a great application, that they're now going way down, Apple's going to the chip. So most markets will vertically integrate when we have large successful players. But I think for a while, we're going to see a lot of people competing on one layer.
Yes, sir, Chris.
Thank you for your comments. Coming back to, well, I'll frame it this way. There's a fair amount of chatter in the industry looking at the U.S. being at a potentially disadvantage compared to the rest of the world, either because of more onerous regulations here or perceived uncertainty regarding the regulation. And so do you view projects and companies that are based in the U.S. at truly a disadvantage either for fundraising or otherwise? And if you do, what would be your magic wand to either put in place one new law or regulation to kind of address that?
So to repeat the question for the camera, the question is, do you feel that companies are disadvantaged if they're domiciled in the U.S. given the complex regulatory field? Sorry.
And if you could wave the magic round.
Right. What would be the most impactful regulation if we were to pass new legislation?
I thought for a while, maybe last year, that there would just be this continued flight away from the U.S. because of the actions or lack of actions, SEC. But when I met with a lot of the non-U.S. based or companies that had left Berlin or wherever, the problem was that the U.S. market is still so big that they still had to navigate a way to get the product operational in the U.S. So they still found themselves confronted, not at the incorporation level or New York bit license level, but they still had to figure out how to slice this market. This is CryptoKitties. Like they're in Vancouver, they've had a super friendly Canadian regulatory regime for tokens, but they want to be able to sell tokens to people in the U.S. So, so I don't think it's a panacea, and I still think the U.S.'s lack of regulatory clarity affects everyone. Second question, if I could wave a magic wand, I just don't, I can answer the question, I just don't think my magic wand is ever going to be potent. But you know, we need a clear path to utility token. It's just a fundamental piece of the architecture. And how can you either sell them or not sell them, but sell something else and then distribute, or how can you build something that utilizes a utility token, and how can we get enough regulatory certainty around it that like Apple will allow it to exist right in an app? You can talk to Jonathan about that. But I think that's what I'd like to see clarity on. I don't think it's about to happen.
Yes, sir.
Question for you. Is ETH money, and the competing layer one projects need to think about the moneyness of their utility token to be successful?
So the question is Ether money, and is being money kind of a critical component for new projects?
I want to hear your answer to that.
Wow. Okay. I think like ETH is money if Ethereum community wants it to be. I think like all of these, anything that has form of a cryptocurrency could be used as money functionally, right? But whether they are used as money is conditional upon the social consensus of how it's used. So, you know, Bitcoin started out with a money story, and now it's very firmly like a store of value story. The store of value, you know, it's similar, but it doesn't move as much as money, right? And that has profound implications for whether, you know, like Lightning networks are monetizable. On the other hand, some people argue that, you know, you need that component to actually create sort of a cushion of value that bootstraps networks into fundamentally valuable business models. I think all that stuff is like super experimental and speculative, and we really need to run more experiments to show that that's the case.
Do competing layer one projects need to think about these properties?
I think it's definitely very healthy to be involved in the kind of ongoing discussion of how these technologies are used. So if you're not paying attention to those discussions, like, you know, you might become disadvantaged. So, but whether that is a critical, you know, to say that like moneyness is a critical component of something, I think has a high burden of proof. And given that, like, you know, nothing is really that successful as a fundamentally value capturing mechanism in blockchain, it's kind of early to say that that is the property that you need. It's a hypothesis.
I like his answer.
Okay, any other questions? Chris, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things that I do is I operate a lot of validators on staking networks. So it's happened to hear what you said about the infrastructure-related projects. One of the challenges since I've been doing this for the past couple of years is trying to choose networks to validate on. So it's an investment in infrastructure and resources. So I was wondering what you look for in a layer one network to some extent. You know, how is a layer one network eventually going to generate value? Is it developer activity, which you mentioned? And then I think in the context of Bloom, where this is a network who got the users, well, it's a company that got the users right first, and now they're building a network where most of these layer one networks today are building the network and then hoping the users will wake up.
So maybe to paraphrase you a bit for the camera, what are the criteria for investing in layer one or base layers?
Well, I want to make an observation and a question back to you first, just to make sure I know the thread of the conversation. It seems to me that whether you're a miner or a validator on a network, the first question you're asking is purely an ROI question, right? Because there is hard CapEx and OpEx required to operate that. And you, by definition, would seek whatever your best short-term return is on that power and compute and, you know, your CapEx and OpEx. The way, you know, you go to whattomind.com and you redo the calculation every couple days, or at least you did when you could make money mining, just because you want most efficient return of the resources, right? But if you're building a business or making a commitment to being a validator on a protocol, then you actually care not just about day-to-day ROI, but you want like make a long-term strategic bet, right? Because maybe there could be some architecturally specific investments you would make, certain GPU types or certain compute resources that would be more efficient on that platform. Right? Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, the other thing I would add is that being early is usually advantageous because you have to also develop a reputation within the community
Right.
in order to attract delegation.
Yeah.
So,
And also you could have higher appreciation of the what you receive for your stake.
of
Right?
rewards, sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so for example, I try and operate early, so that way by the time the network goes live, people recognize the validator, so they may delegate to me.
Right.
Because if you're starting once the network's live, it might be a little harder to establish
Establish reputation.
reputation.
So that's an interesting question. So that's why you want intelligence on what's likely to
Yeah,
be
just
worth
when you
it.
look at all these networks across the board, how do you know, what do you start to look at? You look at developer activity, you look at the team behind it, you know, all the basics, I guess.
So again, I think there are smarter and more established investors in this space, like Chris and the whole A16Z crypto team, that is going very deep on the technical architecture, the consensus mechanisms, the sort of evaluating every level of the technical plan for a layer 1 protocol and making bets, I think, based on how differentiated and how likely it is to be successful. I'm not doing that. One, because we didn't spin up a team that big to be that specific. Instead, I'm looking later than that and saying, who is voting with their developer resources, right? Who is building on top of this? How many? Why? Why do they choose this? Let me talk to them. How successful is their early prototypes? Are they working? How responsive is the layer 1 protocols community to the needs of the developers? I'm looking for evidence of that there's developer adoption, which comes later than like, I'm gonna make a technical architecture bet, which makes me just like a little dumber, and just, like I'm willing to wait a little bit longer and I could sacrifice a bunch of gains too. So I'm looking for something maybe similar to what you're looking for, is you want to bet on platforms that are going to have longevity, rather than just take a pure portfolio approach. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that evidence. Look, I mean, we already know, as I said before, I think we know how to judge what healthy developer ecosystems look like. They've been going on for quite some time, decades. So I think we know what proxies of healthy developer ecosystems look like. And look, it's super early. There's very few, but it's not just like, what are the day traders doing with the token?
Great. Maybe just a couple more. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, I want to key off a couple of things you said in that lightning round. You talked about Facebook having the ability to bring on 1 billion people like this. You mentioned the fact that traditional assets, simply just so much money that might be able to come. And I asked the question, how important do you think it is that kind of the existing corporate universe, the owners of these existing inventories, specifically when it comes to digital media, whether it's gaming or music or anything else in the digital media world, how important is their participation in this industry to us reaching that critical mass of adoption? I know it's obviously key, the fact that Warner Music is involved in the latest round with that whole ladder. So is that vital, or do we have such prolific creation of content that's existing outside of that incumbent world that we can bootstrap sufficiently enough critical mass?
I think history would show that in most cases, we don't need participation by legacy corporate giants for a new technology, architecture, or platform to succeed. Because in most cases, it was never required. There are some exceptions. Certain dApps, certain application layers require the participation of the legacy folks. So like Netflix couldn't exist if it wasn't able to rent you DVDs that you actually wanted the movies for. And it was, but by the way, no one wanted to sell them DVDs, but there was a loophole in the law that let them go buy DVDs from Walmart and then rent them. And so they had a credible threat against the legacy content owners to make them play ball. If that didn't exist, there would be no Netflix. So typically, the legacy IP content owners do not allow you to exploit their stuff in a new way that would let you accrue great value. So I think we're always forced to find different ways forward. But there also tend to be laggards, not early adopters. So my bet is actually on, I think what we're all waiting for is that dApp moment that explodes, and it could be happening at this very minute. But my bet is it's not actually, I think the NBA's got a good shot at it just because everyone knows the NBA, but I would not at all be surprised. In fact, I think it's more likely that somebody does Tetris on the blockchain and we get 5 million players in a week. Or it may not be a game, but it could be the flashlight app. I mean, something's going to go, and we're all waiting for that. I think we all hope it happens in the next month or two, and not 2 years from now. But I don't think it requires participation by the legacy.
I definitely want my flashlight on the blockchain.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, Mr. Andrew in the back.
Outside of media, outside of finance, what other big industries do you think are going to be significantly impacted by digital assets and crypto, and is that affecting your investment thesis for the startups that are entering
Yeah.
healthcare, education?
Yeah. I'm a skeptic actually that every app, every vertical should be using a blockchain instead of a database. I don't believe that at all. But it just comes back to that simple question earlier: is what are the benefits of going decentralized that fix what's broken with the previous model? And I can think of a lot of examples where it does. So I think those are the ones that we'll see impacted the most. But I do believe that the decentralized architecture in general, layer 1, layer 2 if necessary, decentralized data storage, identity, on and on. I think that is a complete fundamental rewiring of the way applications are built online in technology in general. And I think that architectural change could impact everything. Now that would be a 30-year switch in the same way that the cloud screwed up, running your own data centers, and open source software impacted, and SaaS impacted, standalone application sales. So that is my bet. I'm betting actually that this is more about a technological change than about it enables DeFi, and that's why we have to do it.
Great. One more question. Sorry.
Awesome. What are your thoughts on the viability of autonomous funding organizations like the DAO? Do you think that they can scale traditional venture value add activities?
When I first started blogging before I became a VC, I wrote some stupid 2-paragraph post of open source VC. Let's discuss. And so I've been fascinated by the idea. VC investing in general is all about trying to get an information. And so if a different governance mechanism can produce an insight, well, actually investing is more than just information management. It's believing something that believing something that most other people don't believe, and being right about that. So the question I have about DAOs is, as investing organizations, is I can see how it can generate an information advantage, but if it by definition converges on conventional wisdom, then it won't have an investment advantage, right? So it might be a really efficient way of dispensing large groups of capital to things that are already working, let's say growth rounds, but will it be efficient at finding the disruptive things that most people don't believe is going to work, which is why Airbnb is worth $45 billion, right? Because a lot of people didn't believe it's going to work, right? So I think that's, you guys probably have a good answer for it, but that's my big question about them.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much for
thank you.
joining
Can
us
I just
today.
say, there's a bunch of people in this room who have been supportive of me and helped me gain some knowledge about the space, and you all know who you are, and thank you very much for your help to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you to David. Thanks to Jake. Thank you to CoinShares for hosting us, Marty for helping us set up, to Meltem, etc.